Hello, everyone. This is Malcolm Eastman, and today we are going to be in Packet Tracer, and today we're going to be configuring inter-VLAN routing with SVIs. So before we begin, I wanted to just touch upon inter-VLAN routing and what it is and why you would use it. So inter-VLAN routing uses SVIs or interface VLANs as default gateways for different VLANs within the network. Right. So the purpose of using inter-VLAN routing is to give different VLANs the ability to communicate with each other. Right. This sounds very similar to router on a stick, which would use sub-interfaces and encapsulation. But with inter-VLAN routing, I find inter-VLAN routing much simpler to configure than router on a stick. And instead of a router, we're going to be using a multi-layer switch as our default gateway, right? So in this little lab that I have, I've only configured the IP addresses for each of the computers, right? So PC1, PC2, PC3, and then VLAN 10 is going to be over here, and then VLAN 20 is going to be over here. VLAN 10's IP address is going to be 196.10.10.0, and VLAN 20's IP address is going to be 196.10.11.0 with a WAX24 address, right? So again, as you can see, only thing that's been configured has been the IP addresses for each of the computers. There's no configurations to any of the switches. We're going to do all of that live and together. All right, so first thing that I want to do, I want to make sure I have each of the VLANs created and the appropriate interfaces are added to those VLANs. So I'm going to start over here with switch 1, and I'm going to go into the CLI. And what I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this switch. And the host name is going to be switch 1. Right now, I have two interfaces, so it's going to be fast Ethernet O/1 and fast Ethernet O/2, right? And I want to configure both of those together to save some time, be a little bit more efficient. So it's going to be an interface range, and then I'm going to do fast Ethernet 0-1 to 2, right? And so I'm going to do the command I'm going to use is going to be switch or access VLAN, and this is going to be VLAN 10, right? And since the access VLAN 10 doesn't exist, it's going to create the VLAN for me, right? So I want to check my work. So it's going to be do show VLAN just to make sure. And as you can see right here, VLAN 10 has been created with the 2 ports associated with it, right? Oops. I wanted to do just, oh, there we go. Okay, so now that I've done that, right, what I want to do next, I want to start configuring trunk ports because we are going to need trunk ports for this configuration, right? So I'm going to do, it's going to be interface G0/1. It's a gigabit interface. And I'm going to do switch port mode trunk, right? And after I do this configuration, I'm going to also disable DTP. Why am I going to disable DTP? It's just a good practice. It's really good for your security posture of your switches to disable DTP. You don't want it to auto negotiate. You would in an enterprise production network, you would manually want to go in and configure trunks, right? So I'm going to hit enter. And the next configuration I'm going to do is going to be switch port, no negotiate. That's how I stop DTP from making negotiations, right? I'm going to get a mismatch syslog message on the opposite end of this soon-to-be trunk port. But again, I want that because I want to manually configure trunk ports, right? So best practice, disable DTP on your when you're configuring trunk ports, right? So you can manually configure them. All right. So on this switch, I've done the host name. I've also made sure the VLANs, the two appropriate interfaces are in their respective VLANs. And I've started the trunk port configuration, right? So now I'm going to hit end, because what end does, it takes you straight down, no matter where you are in the configuration terminal, it drops you straight back down to the enable mode, right? So I hit exit to get out of that. I'm going to exit out of switch one. See, and as you see here, we got this yellow dot here. That's because we have a mismatch. But that's fine because we don't want to have it auto negotiate, right? So, yeah. And as you can see here, it's blocking because it's inconsistent port type, which is fine because we're going to fix that momentarily. Enable T, and again, host name. This is going to be switch 2. Right? And there's only one PC on this side, so it's going to be just a single interface, and that's going to be fast Ethernet 001. And then we're going to do switch ports, access, VLAN, and this is going to be VLAN 20. Configure VLAN, do show VLAN. Just want to check again. All right, yes, it has created the VLAN. Now, why do I do that? I do that a lot in my labs. Do a lot of show commands to make sure I've configured the appropriate port or VLAN properly. Reason I want to do that is because even in a lab like this, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything correctly and I'm checking my work and I'm looking at the configuration in real time, right? Because you want to get into the habit. Your labs, whether it's cloud or networking or cybersecurity, you want to treat your labs like this is an enterprise network, like people are working on this currently, or better, or let's say you're configuring a network on or server on some downtime, right? To kind of, obviously to be out of business hours so you're not interrupting work. You're treating your labs like that because when you're in the field and you're at work, it's a seamless transition from working on your labs to working at a production network. You feel right at home, but you treated your labs like a work environment, right? So that's why I do a lot of show commands. That's why I check, right, over and over and over again to make sure things are right. So that when I'm in the field, when I'm working on a company's network, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything correctly, right? Because I only want to do it once. I don't want to do it twice. So we've configured the VLAN for this particular network. Now, next thing we're going to do, we are going to go into interface G0/1. And it's going to be the same thing. So it's going to be switch port, mode, trunk, and then switch port, no negotiate, right? So then I'm going to do show. And remember, the reason we do is because if I just put show interface trunk, I'll get an error message. The reason I put do is similar to when I put excuse me, similar to the go command, right? In Juniper, do show interface trunk. Right, so I got it right here. So the VLAN has the trunk is in trunking mode, and now the two trunk ports for the trunk between switch one and switch two is now right. What we want to do now, I want to now start adding the VLANs that are going to be allowed to use this trunk port, right? So that command is switch ports trunk loud VLANs, and it's going to be 10, should be 20. Again, let's do it again. Do show interface trunk. All right. So now I see that on the VLAN is allowed on trunk are 10 and 20, and then the ports VLAN and active in management domain is 20 is just 20, right? So now I want to end and I want to go back to the other side. I'm gonna hit exit. Now I'm going to go over to back to switch one to add the allowed VLANs on switch one. and that is going to be interface G0/1. And I'm going to do switch ports, trunk, allowed, VLANs 10, 20. Do show interface trunk, and I see 10 and 20. Right? So I'm going to hit exit. Could have just hit end there, would have been much quicker. And now I have another interface that I have to enable trunk port on. And that's the gigabit 002 port, because this is going to the switch, our multi-layer switch. So I'm going to hit enable, hit Conf T, and I'm going to go into interface G0/2 switch port mode, not mode, switch port mode trunk. Again, switch port, no negotiate. And then on this one, I'm going to do switch ports, trunk, allowed, VLAN, and this is going to be 10 and 20. And then on this one, I'm going to create VLAN 10 on here, just because reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure, let me do show interface trunk. Because I want VLANs allowed and active in management domain to be 10 and 20, because this port, this is going to see all of the VLANs. So I just want to make sure 10 and 20 are allowed, and they're allowed and active in management domain. Okay. Now hit end, exit. And so far we're done. We have finished all the configurations for the switch. Let's go over what we've done so far. So for our switch 1, we made sure that PC1 and PC2 are in VLAN 10. And then for VLAN 20, we've made sure that PC3 is in VLAN 20. Right. And then we've configured the trunk port over here. Right. Now we're going to head to the main component of this lab, which is our multi-layer switch, because this is what we're going to use for our interface VLAN, for inter-VLAN routing. So I'm going to click the switch, the multi-layer switch, right? And we're going to skip the initial setup dialog. We'll go straight into configuration mode. And we're going to do the host name. Again, best practice, multi-layer switch 1. All right? So first thing we want to do is I'm going to configure the trunk port first. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to go interface G0/1, and we're going to do switch port trunk, switch port mode trunk. Command reject an interface whose trunk encapsulation is auto cannot be configured to trunk mode. So what I'm going to do is going to be switch ports encapsulation. Switch port trunk encapsulation dot 1Q. Sorry. So now I'm going to go back to that mode, and now it's there. But then again, what I want to do is switch ports, no negotiate. Right. Now let's do show interface trunk. Now I'm looking. Okay, cool. Now here's the thing. With interface VLAN on a multi-layer switch, right, or layered on managed layer 2 switch, you can't, the interface VLAN will not become active unless the VLAN that's associated with that interface VLAN is created. So for instance, if I just do interface VLAN on this switch, nothing will happen. So like for instance, we're going to do interface VLAN 10. And nothing happened. It didn't tell me the port was up. It didn't give me anything, right? Why is that? Because on this switch currently, there is no VLAN 10. Let's take a look. Do show VLAN. There is no VLAN 10, right? So in order for me to get that interface up, I need to do VLAN 10. And as you can see here, VLAN 10 was created. Now interface VLAN 10 is up. And I'm going to do the same thing with VLAN 20, right? Now I'm going to do interface VLAN 20. Now both of them both went up, right? So let's go back to interface VLAN 10. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an IP address. It's actually just like, it's similar to what you would do for a router when you're adding an IP address to a router interface. All right, so this one, since it's VLAN, this is going to be VLAN 10's interface on their default gateway. So it's going to be 196.10.1, and I need the subnet mask. It's a WAC 24. So it's going to be 255.255.255.0. And then we're going to go back and we're going to go into interface VLAN 20. We're going to do IP add 196.10.11.1 255.255.255.0, right? Now, we're done here, right? No, we're not. We have added the IP addresses to both of the switches, to both of the interface VLANs. We have added the VLANs there so the interface VLAN is turned on and we have configured the trunk ports, right? I want to check one more time. Let's check my trunk port before we leave. Do show interface trunk. Oh, I didn't add, oh, whoops. I did not add the VLAN. So let's do that right now. The VLAN's allowed. I did not do interface VLAN allowed. I'm sorry, I didn't do the VLAN allowed. So let's do switch ports, trunk, loud, VLANs, that's 10 and 20. Am I in the right one? Yes, I did. Oh, I think that did. Interface T0/1 ports, trunk, loud, like 10. Okay, here we go. Do show interface trunk. Okay, so that looks good, right? Now we can now we can exit out the trunk. Now let's try to ping and see what happens. Let's see if we did everything correctly, right? So let's go to our command prompt. Let's hit ping, and let's try to ping PC2 on VLAN 20. Sorry, PC3, excuse me. And I'm going to speed this up just so. And we didn't get a ping, right? Why is that? We've done everything right correctly. We've added the trunk ports, right? We have added the correct PCs to the correct VLANs. We've attached the interface VLANs to the switch, multi-layer switch, and we've also made sure the VLANs are up, right? To make sure the VLANs are created on the multi-layer switch so the interface VLANs turn on. But we still didn't get a ping. Why is that? The reason we didn't get a ping is because we didn't enable IP routing on our multi-layer switch. So let's go back to our multi-layer switch. And the command is going to be from the configuration terminal, IP routing. Let's go back to PC1, back to the command terminal, and try to ping. Let's see what happens. Now we get a reply, right? Very, very important to remember. When you're doing interface VLAN routing with a layer 3 switch, have to remember to configure IP routing on that switch in order for you to get your IP package routing, right? Let's try to ping VLAN 20's default gate. So we get, and we get another ping, right? So let's talk about what we've done. We configured the switches to have the appropriate VLANs on, and then we've added interfaces to those VLANs. And then on both of the switches, right, we made sure we configured trunk ports. We disabled DTP. Right? Again, best practice, very nice security, very good security measures for your switches. Disabled DTP. So your switches don't auto-negotiate trunk port, right? We don't want that. So whenever we configure a trunk, we want to auto-disable. We want to disable dynamic trunking protocol. We always want to do it manually, right? Good best practice for enterprise networks, right? You keep you and your business safe, right? And you would do that on all trunk ports, whether it's going from a multi-layer switch to a or just from layers 2 switch to layer 2 switch, right? Then we did the same thing on our multi-layer switch 1 over here. We made sure we had the trunk port configured, disabled DTP, and we configured interface VLANs. Right? Again, remember, if you don't have that VLAN configured on that multi-layer switch or even layer 2 switch, that interface VLAN is not going to be operational. You have to make sure you configure the VLAN, and then when you do interface VLAN, that interface will go up, right? Because then you can also, it doesn't even matter if you attach the IP address, you won't get a ping, nothing will work, right? You got to make sure that interface has a VLAN that's created on that switch. Right? And then again, IP routing. You want that switch to kind of act like a router. You got to make sure IP routing is turned on for that switch, right? So again, interface VLAN routing is another way you can get VLANs to communicate with each other. You have two options: route on a stick and inter-VLAN routing, right? Both are useful. Both are great options for getting VLANs to communicate with each other, to outside of their respective VLAN. This, in my opinion, this is less steps. It's a little bit quicker, right? You're using all switches instead of using a router as well. Sometimes some reason you would want to use interface, you would want to use a inter-VLAN routing instead of router on a stick is because some people would want to have that router serve another purpose than essentially being the default gateway for multiple VLANs. They'll use a multi-layer switch for that instead. This is where inter-VLAN routing comes into play. And this again, as you can see, it was a much easier setup than router on a stick. We're not really dealing with encapsulation outside of that one trunk port that I had to do on the multi-layer switch, but that's it. With router on a stick, you're doing encapsulation for every single sub-interface that you decide to create for your particular switches and their VLANs, right? I don't have to really worry too much about the encapsulation matching the VLAN ID because there's no I'm not doing none of that .1Q encapsulation, right? Because for instance, if I was using a router in this situation, it'd be VLAN 10, right? So it would be encapsulation .1Q 10. But you have to make sure the encapsulation number matches the VLAN ID, right? But here I didn't really have to do that, right? If I wanted, again, I think it's best practice to make sure that your VLAN ID matches the interface VLAN, right? It's so much easier to manage and pay attention and look at. Like for instance, with sub-interfaces in our router on stick setup, when we do a sub-interface, so it would be like 0.10. I want to make sure for best practice, making it easier to manage and making it easier to when I'm looking at the network from the top down, I can identify why something's being used, right? So if interface dot 10, if I see 0.10, there's a VLAN 10 in that network, then I know why it's there. I know that some interface is serving as the default gateway for VLAN 10. And if it was 0.20, be the same thing here. So we really want to make sure that we're looking at making sure we can manage our networks, make it simple to look at on paper, right? And it makes it just, again, so much easier to troubleshoot and manage, expand, and downsize, right? Okay, so this has been my, little lab on inter-VLAN routing. I hope you've learned something, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in a later lab video. As always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Malcolm Eastman, or you can reach out to me through email at malcolm@malcolmeastman.tech. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day.